Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to HOTH's React workshop. My name is Brooke. I'm going to be walking you today through all of the basics of React. We're going to be looking at components, props, array.map, very basics of state, looking at how we can build a nice React web page. Well, one thing to note before we start, this tutorial does assume prior knowledge of CSS, some JavaScript. If you haven't been in contact with these languages, I would definitely refer you to other tutorials that we have on these topics before we get into React. Okay, if you want to look at the slides while we go along, here's a link to the slides. And if you look on the bottom left corner, there's also a README on our GitHub that kind of walks you through this tutorial. Okay, now the demo that we're going to build today, we're going to be making a hat colored grocery list. So essentially what we have is a list of grocery components and actually have the finished code over here, and it's running on localhost 3000. You can check items off, you can uncheck them, and you can add new items, but you would have to do it in the code. And that's what we're going to be making today. So what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to get started with everything you need to know about React. Then we're going to get into the components, then the props, array.map, and we're just going to touch on the very basics of state and use state. So first thing to do, what is React? React is a free open source JavaScript library for front-end development. It is maintained by Meta and an open source community, and it's extremely widely used. Lots of the sites that you interact with on a daily basis are going to be using React to build their front ends. Netflix uses it, Instagram uses it, Uber uses it. It's from my Meta. You can imagine that Facebook uses it. Why do we want to use it? Well, other than the fact that so many other people are using it, we want to use React because it gives us these reusable components. We're going to talk about components more in depth later on. For now, think of them as building blocks for your website. Little things like the checkbox in our grocery app we saw earlier, or just text boxes. React also gives us efficient updates. What React does is that when a user triggers something on the screen or something needs to change in the display, it lets us update these individual components instead of reloading the entire page every time. For instance, the checkbox we saw earlier. React also gives us lots of flexibility. Once you learn how to use React, you can make static sites with things like Gatsby. You can make mobile apps with React Native. With the help of some tools like Element, you can even make desktop applications. Furthermore, if you're going to be recruiting in the tech industry, React is a very high demand skill, especially if you're looking at front-end development. Okay, now, how do we actually set up a React project? We have to first download a text editor and a web browser. If you made it this far, I'm sure these are things you already have. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code and Chrome in this tutorial. Anything else you use, as long as you're comfortable with, is perfectly fine. Other than that, you're also going to want to have downloaded Node.js. Node.js essentially allows for just a development server where we can see the changes that we make in our code in real time. If you're downloading it for the first time, make sure that you get LTS in the 64-bit version. I'm going to give you a second to do that. Okay. Now, actually setting up a React project. There's just 3 easy lines, and we're going to type them in terminal. We're going to do npx create React app. Let's actually do that right now. Just cover that up. Just do terminal within Visual Studio Code here. Let's first cd onto desktop. And we're going to do npx that's using node create React app. And then after that, we're just going to put the name of the React app we want to make. So I'm just going to home mine grocery list. This might take a second to run. Let's stop that from running for the time being, just to make space. Okay. While it builds, looking at the next 2 lines, cd into the new React app you just created. That's just cd means go to this directory. That's just moving into the app you made. And then npm start to start up the site. Let's do that right now. Cd grocery list and npm start. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to open up the default React site that just has for you. If we do Command O and we open our here on desktop, you can see we have this new grocery list. And we see all of this stuff that React has just given us. This might, that no modules is in here for some reason. Mostly we're going to be working with not all of these files, even though this might seem intimidating. We're going to be mostly working with app.js. And if you look over here at index.js, you're going to see that what this React site essentially is it's just rendering this one giant app tag that's app.js. This is where app comes from. And inside of app is everything that we want displayed. It's just one big div tag containing everything in here. And we can confirm that this code we have on the right is translating into what we have on the left, because if we change something here, we make it hack instead of everything else, and we refresh the page, we're going to notice that it stopped working. Yeah, when we refresh the page and it starts working again, we're going to notice that the text has changed correspondingly. You do that again, there it reloads very fast. You can see the effect of your code in real time. Once you have your browser open up here to localhost 3000, it should usually pop up automatically for you. If it doesn't, you can just type in localhost 3000 in your browser, and that should show up. And now we have this default React app. Once we have that, we can actually delete everything that is inside of this big div tag. We don't need that. What we want is a nice clean slate over here. So some default CSS here for the formatting. We can delete that as well. We're going to do some of our own CSS soon. Okay. Now, how do we use React? We're going to be using React with JSX. And yes, JSX is kind of a new language. No, please don't go away because of that. JSX is very simply, it's a syntax add-on to JavaScript that lets you write HTML within JavaScript. So you already know JavaScript and you already know HTML. And what JSX does is it just combines the two to build something much more super convenient and much more powerful. You can have something like what we have on the bottom here. You can have what's like a JavaScript element, but it might look strange if you're only familiar with JavaScript. It's also an HTML header. It's a header tag with the text "Welcome to HOTH," and this is functional because of JSX. It lets us automatically, once you build a React project with the Create React app that we saw earlier, you're going to be able to use JSX within that and do things like this. Some other examples of JSX, you can put JavaScript code in curly braces and just use them in your HTML. For instance, we can make a JavaScript variable called HOTH number and put 10 in there because it's our 10th hack on the hill. And you can make a header tag in HTML that says HOTH, curly braces, HOTH number, and JSX will deal with that in a way that it knows to put in that header the HOTH 10 instead of just printing out HOTH number. This also works with functions. You can have something like a JavaScript name function on the right here that just returns the name hack, and call that function inside of this HTML header tag within these curly braces, and JSX will know to print out the result of that function. So this will be I love hack, not just I love name function, which is what would happen if you forgot the curly braces. Okay, now that we know all of the basics of how React is going to work, let's look at some actual things that's in it. First, the components. So we touched on components earlier. A React component is the key to React and why it's so powerful. Components are how we can reuse code. Think of them as building blocks, little bricks, pieces to build up your site. Components are going to accept inputs as props that lets you display different information. It's going to return a React element. Now, a lot of that is probably going to sound confusing right now, but don't worry, we're definitely going to be going over that in detail over the course of this tutorial. So just to give you an example of looking at things through the lens of React components, here is a screenshot from YouTube. This is just your standard YouTube video playing what it looks like on the site. we have breaking this down into components. You see that what this actually is a video component for the video, a title component, you can see where this is going, and a component for the account, another for some actions the user can interact with, and another for the description. Now, what's interesting is what more we can do is we can zoom in on one of these components and see that that is actually made out of components as well. Can you get a sense of what these components might be? Yeah? Okay, first we have a profile picture component and another one for the name of the account and another one for the subscriber information. So at this point, we can actually break this down into exactly what it would look like in terms of the HTML. So the profile picture is going to be an IMG tag. For the account name, we're going to have some sort of header tag. And for the subscriber info, just a regular P tag. And we can actually make this ourselves. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Our grocery list item is going to look very similar. And the way we're going to make this component is we're going to use something called a functional component. There's two types of components in React. The other one is called a class component. And we're not going to get into that today, but I would definitely direct you to the React documentation if you're interested in learning more about class components, how they're different from functional components, when you might want to use each. Today, we're just going to talk about how functional components are basically JavaScript functions, and they return React elements. For example, to make one of these grocery components that we had earlier, we're going to be reusing these individual components so we can display different groceries with the same formatting. For every one of these, we want to return enclosed within one div tag, something with a grocery, a header tag for the name of the grocery, a P tag for a little note on the item, sometimes you need that, and an image tag. And what we're going to be putting in that is the checkbox that we want to have. Note that the source here is not something that you can just open up. It's not a URL. This assumes that we are in some sort of folder with which you can find another folder called images and find that PNG. This works in the context of our demo. So if we run this code, what we're going to produce in our browser is a little component that looks like this. We have corresponding to our header tag, the grocery name, P tag for the note, and we have our checkbox. This doesn't exactly look like what we want it to look like just yet, but that's what we're going to have for the component. Now, we're going to demo this right now. But before that, one last important note is that you want to keep your components in each its own separate file. And if you want to use a particular component in the other files, you have to remember to do import and export. So in the file in which you define your component, at the very end, you're going to want to put export default name of component. In this case, we're going to be exporting default grocery. In the file where you want to use that component, put import grocery from the directory in which grocery.js is in /grocery.js. Okay. Now let's do a demo. Inside of app, what we want is to have, first we're going to want to make a header that just says grocery list. We save that, it shows up, very nice. We do want it to have some formatting though. We want it to have that nice colored background, and we want some padding in between here and here. And that's going to be the job of CSS. Now, there is not enough time in this React tutorial to go over the specific CSS for the formatting. I have pre-written CSS that I'm just going to copy and paste in here. If you're interested to know what it does, you can feel free to check out all of this code is on our GitHub. Essentially, it just gives the title some margins, and it gives us that is not CSS for app. Yeah, no, that is grocery.css. We're going to deal with that later. That is app.css. And yeah, what this does is it gives us that nice padding for the header, and it gives us the nice gradient that we want. So yeah, if we save that, you can see it has a color. Grocery list is white now. To apply the header formatting, we wanted to set to class name equals header, because that is what we have here correspondingly. Save that. And now we have the padding. Great. Okay. So now to actually populate the grocery list with groceries, let's add a new file within source. We're going to call that one components. And this is not a folder. And we're going to put all of our components in here, which in this case is just groceries. All this grocery.js. And in here, let's just have the function groceries because we are doing a functional component. It's not taking any input right now. We're going to look at how eventually we want it to be able to take input so that we can display different things. For the time being, it's just all going to return the same thing. We want it to return, let's first enclose everything in one big div tag because that's just necessary. And some sort of header tag, a smaller header tag for the grocery name. P tag for the notes. And an img tag because we want that checkbox. Now to get the checkbox in here, I already have that file. It is on my desktop. Let's just drag it in. Wait, let's make a folder for it called images. We're going to want to start out with the unchecked checkbox because that's what we want the user to see when they log in immediately. And let's import that into grocery.js. We're going to be importing it as the name unchecked box from, put the directory in there, images / images. Recall that .. means we are exiting our current directory, which is components. We're going to that folder that encloses it. We're going to source. Then from there, going into images and grabbing unchecked box.png. So the source is going to be just unchecked box, but in curly braces, recall what we talked about. And we're just not going to put any alt text for now. Close the tag. This should work. Now what we can do in app.js is we can have a grocery tag. Once we import it, once we import and export it. Export default grocery. Just like we talked about. Import grocery from, again, the directory. That's going to be /components / grocery.js. So we can now use it. There we go. And that should work. We have a component. This is what we looked at earlier, except we wanted to have formatting. Again, this is going to be the job of CSS. Let's apply some of that. Again, we're going to be copy and pasting. I'll try to talk through it as much as I can. For the CSS, we're just going to make a little flex sort of display. And with lots of padding so that things look nice. Make the checkbox smaller, add some margins. We have to put all of these class names in here. For the purposes of the display, we need grocery name and notes to be in the same div tag. So the formatting knows what to do with it, and the class name for that is small flex, as I recall, because the display type is called flex. And yeah, that should be good. Last name equals grocery name and then grocery notes. Keep forgetting my imports today. This is not a good day to be doing a tutorial. Well, maybe it is actually, because it's a good indicator. It's a good reminder that you should always do your imports and exports. This is just called checkbox, I think. Am I correct? Oh yeah, the flex should enclose everything in here. There we go. Okay. Now that we have our component looking nice and formatted, we can make more of these to populate app.js. We can make more of these tags. And they're all going to show up. We can fill this entire page up with more and more grocery tags, but one thing you will notice is that they all say the same thing, which is not exactly what we want. We want there to be different groceries that we can note. So how do we do that? This is where props come in handy. What is a prop? Props are there because we don't want every grocery component to be showing the same thing. Props let us display different information using the format of the same component. This is what a prop would look like. It's going to have these different properties, name and notes, and you can put specific names and notes in there. This is not how we are going to code it. It's going to look a little different. It's just to give you a sense of what is inside of a prop. Now, how do we use props? So remember how functions take in inputs? Yeah, a prop is our input to the grocery function, null component. They're going to be passed in as a single JavaScript object. And the way we do that inside of app.js is we're going to say grocery name equals string apples, notes equals string 25 apples, and we can make a different grocery tag, and we can put in different things of like name equals bananas and notes equals ripe bananas, something like that. But even with this approach, we do have the issue of having to have a bunch of these tags and like writing out all of this name equals no equals in a row. It's going to fill up our app.js. Imagine that we had like 100 grocery items that we wanted to buy. It's going to look really crowded and it's going to be really tiring. Imagine that we were YouTube and we had like a million videos and that's just all of our app.js, just infinite rows of video tags. We don't want that. What we want to be able to do is to map out all of our grocery items. We want to have maybe an array of all of our props. We want to be able to map that all out maybe. And maybe there's a way to do that. There's a way to do that. The way to do that is called array.map. Now, to explain array.map, let's first re-examine what arrays are. You might recall that arrays are collections of items of the same type. 1, 2, 3, 4 is an array. The strings this is, and an array is an array. What the .map function does is that it lets us take in an array and it runs a for loop that goes through, grabs every item in the array one by one, performs some kind of operation on it, an operation that we're going to define for it, and it puts the resulting item into a new array that is returned at the end. So does it make sense? Just look at this picture of fruit. You said I wasn't going to explain it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Array.map is you could give it an array of fruit, and what it's going to do is if you want to slice them up, it just takes every item in the array. First it takes the apple, slices it up, puts it in a new array, takes the orange, slices it up, puts it in a new array, takes banana. You get the idea. Eventually what it returns to you is a new array of the sliced fruit. Now let's look at an example with actual code. So here we have an array of even numbers. we want to turn that array into the odd numbers. How do we do that with array.map? So we call .map on evens, and inside of the parentheses here, what we give it is a function. We have the local variable num, and num is just going to be one by one every number in the evens array. For every number in the array, we're going to run a function that returns that number divided by 2. So it's going to take 2 divided by 2 gives us 1, put it in a new array. Take 4 divided by 2, give us 2, put it in a new array. What do we end up with? You might have imagined. We're going to get a new array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's extremely helpful. Now, let's use props and array.map in the context of our demo. Okay, we can keep that for now. Going back into grocery.js, recall how we left it empty here. Now we're going to do something different. We're going to pass something in, and that something is going to be props. We are going to charge my computer first. It is dying. After passing in the props, what we can do inside of our header and p tags is, instead of hard coding exactly what the thing is going to be, we're going to use curly braces to get a JavaScript object. And that JavaScript object is going to be a property of the props we pass in. And we're just going to call that property props.name. And we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to do props dot notes. Now nothing's showing up here because we're not passing in these props. So let's pass them in over at app.js. Using the method that we saw earlier, we're just going to do name equals, what do we want name to equal? Apples, sure. And notes equals big fat apples. There we go. And we can have whatever we want in here. We can have as many as we want, and we can see that it works. There we go. Now, how do we make a map? First, let's get all of our props in here. We're going to make a new array, and it's just going to be an array of all our props. We're going to call them groceries. And since it's an array, we're going to surround it with square brackets. Everything in there is going to be surrounded by curly braces. Name slash. I don't see why you're angry. I forgot JavaScript. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, shit happens. I don't know. I'm gonna copy in an array that I had earlier. Actually, let's re-record that. Okay, so now let's do props and array.map. Okay, what we're gonna want to do is, back in grocery.js, we're gonna give the function some input. The input is going to be called props. Now, correspondingly, instead of having in our header tags and p tags hard-coded this specific text, what we're going to get is actually, Okay, what we're going to do is back in grocery.js, we're going to give our function some input. The input is going to be props. So now instead of hard coding in our header tag, the very words grocery name, we're going to do is in curly braces, we're going to call on the properties of the props we're passing in. Name, props.name, and this one is going to be props.notes. And now we're going to go into app.js, and what you can see is we can actually pass something in here. And not plural. We can do name equals apple, and we can do notes equal big fat juicy apples, and that's going to show up. In a different tag, we can do something different, and that's going to show up. And this is great. Except we want it to be mapped. We don't want to have a million grocery tags in a row and have to do grocery name equals grocery notes equals. So now instead of having to make these different grocery tags every single time, do grocery name equals this, notes equals that, let's just make an array of all of our props that we want to do. Let's just call this array groceries, and it's going to be equal to square brackets because it is an array. Every item in the array is going to be enclosed by curly braces. Something with the name of apples. Notes of note. And each item in our array is going to be separated by commas, name equals blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to copy over the little 4-item array that I already made. And now we have a nice little array of all of the items that we want to display here. So how do we use array.map to give us the nice little mapping out? Now, we have to call array.map on an array. Which array are we going to call it on? I'm going to call it on groceries, of course. Map. And then inside of that, recall that you definitely need curly braces around this because it is not HTML. You're going to do groceries.map, and inside of the parentheses here, you're going to give it a function. And what is going to get passed into this function is obviously grocery, like every individual groceries was in our array of groceries, but we're also going to need to pass in something else, which is an index. And let's see how we use that. For every grocery, we want to return a grocery tag. And what we're going to give to that tag is, obviously we want to give it the name equal grocery.name, not plural, grocery.name, and the notes will be equal to grocery.notes. But we're also going to have to give it something called key, and we're going to pass into key is the index that we grabbed earlier. And exactly why we need key is a little more complicated. We're not going to get into that. But basically, you just know that React needs to be able to uniquely identify every grocery item within the array that we give it, and that is why it needs to have a key. That is part of the magic of why React works so fast. And yeah, once we fix that, we've mapped out all of the items that we have. We can't click the check mark just yet, but we can learn how to do that right now. Ooh, perfect transition. State. We're gonna look at state. What is state? State lets us keep track of component properties that can change on screen, such as the check mark we're trying to make. Usually change is going to happen after clicking. If you look at the Instagram like button or the Instagram comment button, or basically most buttons, that's going to induce some kind of change. It's also going to happen without clicking, like a display of a countdown that's going to keep happening without you clicking it, like the face of the clock on your Apple iPhone. Now, what do we do with state? We're going to use state with the function called useState. And we're going to have to import it first with import React useState from React. And what useState does is, this is a little complicated, so we're going to go over it in great detail. useState gives us an array of 2 elements. Now, just looking at this piece by piece, useState returns to us an array of 2 elements. The first element is going to be something that contains the state data. So the variable bought, because in our demo, we're trying to indicate whether something has been bought or it has not yet been bought. The first variable is going to contain a true or false value of whether or not it's been bought. And the second thing useState gives us is going to be a function with which we can change the state. So we're going to use the function setBot to change bot from true to false or from false to true. And if you notice, in addition to returning these 2 values, useState also takes in a parameter. And this argument that it takes in is just going to be the initial value we want our state to be set to. So right now, we want the initial value to be set to false. So that's just what we're going to pass into useState. In the context of our demo, what we want to do with useState is we want to be able to check off whether something has been purchased. More specifically, we want in our IMG tag for a user to be able to click on it and change and invert the state of the checkbox, and then correspondingly change the image that is displayed to match that status. How do we do that? Over here, going back into grocery.js, we're going to do something with useState. Let's import it first. Import React useState from React. And at the front of our function before I return we're gonna do const. We get the 2-value array. We call that the first thing we're going to get from useState. Do you remember? It's going to be something that holds our state. So we're just going to call it checkbox state. And the second thing we're going to get is a function with which we use to set that. So we're just going to call that set checkbox state to make things very clear. And that's going to be useState. The parameter we pass in is the default value we want, which we want to be false. So we're just going to do that. And there we go. Now, how do we use checkbox state? First, let's look at, we want to be able to display 2 different images, right? So how do we do that? Now, this is a nice little feature of HTML, but HTML has something called onClick. What onClick does is it basically says, when the user clicks on this IMG tag, we want to do something. Want to do something that is inside of these curly braces. What's that going to be? We're going to make an anonymous function. And what happened? We're going to make an anonymous function. And what we want that function to do is to invert useState, is to invert checkbox state. So how do we do that? If we want it to be true when it's already false, if we want it to be false when the value is true, we want to call set checkbox state and set that to the opposite of what it currently is. And so now when we click this, it's going to set the checkbox state to the inversion of what it already was. And then we want to be able to display different images correspondingly. And the syntax we need to do that is a little strange. It might not be something too much C++, I'm sorry. Might not be something that looks immediately understandable if you haven't seen it before, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to give it an expression inside of this comment here. We're going to give it an expression such as 1 + 2 = 3 and put a question mark after it. And after the question mark, there's going to be two things. They're going to be separated by a colon and, for instance, yay and nay. And what this is going to do is when it sees the syntax, it's going to first evaluate this expression on the left, see whether it's true or false. In this case, it's true. If it's true, the left side of the colon is going to be executed. If it's false, the right side will be executed. So because 1 + 2 = 3 is true, this is going to print out yay. And if we change it to 1 + 2 = 4, it's going to print out nay. That is what the syntax means. So in the context of our demo, what is the evaluation we want to check? That's right, we want to check the state of the checkbox. And depending on that, we want to display either the unchecked box or the checked box, which we haven't imported. Let's do that right now. Okay, yeah. Checked box, put that into images. And import that. Okay. Moment of truth. We can now display different images. And this should be the entirety of our demo. We have now gone through React, JSX, what they are. React is popular too for web development, front-end stuff. JSX is a JavaScript add-on. We have looked at components, basic building blocks of React that lets us reuse code. Props that lets us use the same component to display different information. Array.map, which helps us that also. And state, which is data that is stored and updated by a component. That is all. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy hacking.